Welcome to the White Rabbit on Rumble. I'm the White Rabbit, though I would love to do this on my Patreon channel. I have to do this on Rumble because this is urgent and we need as many eyes on this as possible. It is time, Australia. I feel like everything in my life has been leading up to this point. As we all sit there, don't we, asking, what can we do? Well, we need to stop, as the great quote says, stop asking what your country can do for you and start asking what you can do for your country. And you can start by voting no on the Trojan horse of the voice to Parliament in Australia. For the first time, somebody sent me a clip by Peter Credlin on Sky News, and hats off to her, who had obtained through a Freedom of Information request the full 26-page document of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, which Anthony Albanese, the illegitimate Prime Minister of Australia, because he hasn't been sworn into the Commonwealth, told the citizens of Australia multiple times was a one-page document that hung up on the wall in his office. Turns out he must have 26 pages at least hanging on the wall of his office. When I saved it, it was even more than that. It is an angry, bitter invasion document seeking to remove the democracy of all Australians. Yes, all Australians, including you, those in Aboriginal tribes. How does it do this? Well, it sets up a system of Makarrata. Makarrata basically being run by the UN. And the UN is mentioned in the document of the Uluru Statement from the Heart because, of course, years ago, they very cleverly began treaties on Indigenous peoples, First Nations peoples globally. I don't know if you know much about the UN. It's easy to find if you look hard enough online. But UN soldiers and UN peacekeepers have rocked up into countries globally as an illegitimate police force wearing white as if they were liberating crusaders, and they have raped and murdered and pillaged in every country that they've arrived in. Now, Australia, thanks to Scott Morrison, has already been manufacturing hundreds, potentially thousands of these UN tanks, these peacekeeping, supposed white peacekeeping tanks with the UN written on. There were videos emerging during the pandemic of them coming off the line in the factories in Australia, the assembly line, and everyone was saying, oh, Australia has always manufactured these UN tanks and we send them overseas to the peacekeepers. Well, it would seem after reading the Uluru Statement from the Heart, which makes it very clear that this document, this agenda, being pushed and sought by the Labour Party now for decades in a long and secret and insidious plan to steal away rights, but not just rights, from every single Australian, including Aboriginal Australians, is a lot more than that. It isn't just a UN invasion and takeover. Oh, yes, if the Uluru Statement from the Heart, the voice to Parliament, gets a yes vote, you no longer own your land. You no longer own water on your land. I doubt you'll be able to breathe the air. It will all be taken from you in the name of the voice to Parliament legislation, a change to the Commonwealth Constitution of Australia, 1900 UK. Not only will you see UN peacekeepers here to protect the Aboriginal tribes and their heritage, of course, you will see a complete removal of your democracy. Well, how will it do that? In the 26-page document, which actually looks and reads like a high school project on a communist takeover, you see very clearly that this Makarrata, this council, this angry, bitter, vengeful council, overseen by the UN, will appoint one man and one woman in every district whose strings will be pulled by the UN to do their bidding. And these individuals, this Makarrata, sits above Parliament and above government. It states very clearly in a high school-like graph that that's what it does. And what does that mean? It means that it doesn't matter who you vote for. It doesn't matter whether elections are legitimate or illegitimate. It doesn't matter who arrives to talk in Parliament, to run your government. There will be a new third branch of government, and the third branch of government sits higher than the High Courts, sits higher than Parliament, sits higher than what? You, the people, we, the people. And that's the whole point. It was the reason for the rollout of vaccines. Vaccines and the damage that can be done by metals that now sit inside human bodies act as a human choke chain, like a dog choke chain. This is why at the same time they're also pushing through their misinformation and disinformation bill to protect children. We're protecting children and we're protecting Aboriginal heritage while doing everything we can to remove your democracy, your rights, your freedom of speech. Why? Heresy. It will become heresy to call out the truth that this is an invasion by the one world government, the UN, that it's been planned for decades, that it subverts democracy. They will tell you that it doesn't. They will table all your concerns, so they will say. But they are superseded by the Makarrata, by the third new branch of government, the UN. I don't think Australians realise how serious this is. That if the voice of Parliament gets the yes vote, you could literally be on your fully paid off, owned Australian piece of property, newly renamed, that's part of it, with an Aboriginal name. This is the reason. Do you think they're renaming it to pay homage to the Aboriginal tribes of old? They didn't seem to care too much about Aboriginal heritage and Aboriginal DNA when they were injecting them with mRNA gene-altering therapy. Why on earth would you want to alter the genes of ancient Aboriginal tribes? No, the name changes are so that your property, your land, even in a suburban street, falls under the new jurisdiction. This is all about jurisdiction. This is why the fines during the pandemic were all thrown out of courts. This is why Rod Cullerton, the former federal senator in Western Australia, was able to go and get hard copy deeds of land for people in Western Australia, for farmers. They were forced to hand them over because right now they don't have jurisdiction over your land. The Commonwealth Constitution of Australia, 1900 UK, still stands. However, it will no longer stand if the voice to Parliament gets a yes vote. And that does something very scary for Australians. It completely changes the law on jurisdiction. You won't be able to ask anymore when the UN soldiers, peacekeepers, police, acting on behalf of the Aboriginal tribes, turn up and take ownership and jurisdiction over your property. They'll have it because you said yes in a bleeding heart vote that you thought was to protect heritage. This is a coup. It's an invasion. The European Parliament is calling it out as such. And I believe that, like many of the things during this pandemic, Australia is the test bed. In the words of Christine Anderson of the European Parliament, the German representative, a test balloon. Australia and Canada have been used in various ways to test out this new form of corporate communism, totalitarianism, takeover. America is also in real danger here. We feel like we're in a quiet, calm period, don't we? This is the calm before a very dangerous storm, described by Joe Biden as a dark winter. This is why on one day you will see literally tens, potentially hundreds of negative stories, personal attacks on Donald Trump from various news organizations, including Breitbart and organizations that claim to be right-wing and conservative, because they know that this person or a person like him could stand in the way of their new jurisdiction, their new coup, their invasion of countries. I have no idea as a Brit why King Charles III is on board with this. I don't know if we'll ever know. It's absolutely terrifying. It must be financial. But America is at risk because America has indigenous tribes. America has a First Nations people. They will use and virtue signal that their welfare is the reason they need to be the parents at the table. They need to be the responsible third arm of government to make sure you respect those indigenous tribes. I think it was Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream that said the land should be given back to them, despite the fact that the head office of Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream in America is on stolen indigenous land in America. Didn't see them handing that back in a hurry. That story went quiet very quickly, very much like the Hunter Biden laptop. If this works in Australia, this invasion, this coup, this theft, how can we be sending millions and billions, potentially trillions of dollars to defend democracy in Ukraine? Let's focus on that. Look over here while we take everything from you over there. How on earth can we be expected to do that? We were never asked anyway. There was no referendum on supporting that war. And yet hand over our own democracy in our own countries. The voice to Parliament in Australia is not just a Trojan horse for a UN takeover here on this rock. It is the testbed for the future. Yes, if it fails, they will anger with us. I think while still Prince Charles, there's a clip floating around on my Twitter at allbiteNobark88 where Prince Charles threatens that there will be more extreme weather and more pandemics if we don't acquiesce to the idea of the global warming climate hoax. That too will be used by them because we couldn't have any extreme weather coming along and decimating Aboriginal heritage sites. Everything we've been doing in this pandemic, everything we've endured. I knew on the day I saw Scott Morrison stand on a podium hidden somewhere with flags either side of him. He's now gone off to work in military defence because his entire prime ministership in Australia was a military operation. He talked about COVID. He talked about the pandemic. He talked about safe and effective. And then he placed his hand on the counter and said, now, climate change. And I thought, that was a bit clunky. Something else is going on. That's when I started digging. And that's when I became the White Rabbit, going down rabbit holes to find out the truth. I will ask you again. Stop asking yourself, what can my country do for me? When will I get that great job? When will I get that dream house? When will all this end and go away? How many injections do I need to take? And start asking yourself, what can I do for my country? I'm not even Australian. I just live here. I used to be described by the press as an adopted Australian. This is a great nation, predominantly because of the people, the Australian people of all races and cultures. We're from everywhere. I'm British. My husband's Greek. My friends are from Vietnam, Malaysia, Germany, South Africa, America, and of course, from the Aboriginal tribes. This is a threat to us all. They want us to think that it's communism and totalitarianism, but it isn't. The UN represents the biggest corporate takeover of the planet, the one world government, the great reset that humanity has ever seen. It is insidious. It is a lie. Sky News, who always play it safe, called out the Australian Prime Minister's lies on the Peter Credlin show. The time to act is now. Stop worrying about Fashion Week. Stop worrying about your next holiday and your dog's skin rash. And for God's sake, wake up to the fact that there is an enormous problem here. It is no coincidence that this is happening at the same time that the banks globally are limiting your access to cash. They're even limiting how much cash you can pay in. They won't accept it unless you tell them where it came from. These things are not happening in vacuums. They are multiple arms, much like the coronavirus itself, the spike protein, multiple heads of an extremely toxic, venomous snake known as the One World Government, the UN, and they want Australia. They will destroy her. They will mine her within an inch of her life. She is the most energy efficient country on earth. Acres and acres of natural gas, despite Victorians and potentially the rest of Australia being denied access to that natural gas that doesn't need a coal-fired power station. It just needs to be delivered. But no, they're going to cut you off from that natural gas. You may not have it. It has a value and you don't deserve it. You're not worth it. Someone else in another country, probably China, will pay a much higher price for it. Rare earth minerals, lithium. These are the things they want from Australia. They want to take everything from the rock and the soil. And in order to do that, they need to get rid of what's standing in the way. You, Australians, and your democracy. I say again, ask not what Australia can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Please share this. Please warn everyone. We must vote no on the Voice to Parliament referendum, because if it goes through, there's no going back. This has been The White Rabbit. I'm The White Rabbit. I'll see you next time.